Link 4 monsters are some of the most powerful Link monsters in the game. I mean, we have Firewall Dragon and Gumblar Dragon, which both got banned, and right now we have Boral Sword Dragon and Boral Low Dragon for sort of ending games, and we have Skull Dread for digging deeper into your deck. You have Appaloosa for like ending on your combos, and while all of these cards are very, very powerful, don't get me wrong, they're not really what you're making at the beginning of your combo. Sure, you might make them like halfway through the combo, like in the case of Appaloosa to stop hand traps, but in general, just by nature of being a Link 4 monster, you have to do it after you've already done a few summons. This being said, the way to fix a slower deck really isn't going to be a Link 4 monster, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be a bad choice, because even in the slower deck, sometimes when they get up to speed, they can summon pretty big Link monsters. And I mention all of this because last week when I first started getting sick, which by the way, I'm still sick, so if I sound weird, that's why, a very important Link 4 monster got revealed that a lot of people wanted me to talk about, and that is a new Altergeists Link 4. And I want to talk about this card because I saw a lot of confusion about it, I saw a lot of questions and concerns about it, and most of the comments, like the vast majority of them that I read about this card, were super negative, even from Altergeist players. And that kind of surprises me because I don't think this card is nearly as bad as people are saying it is, and in today's video I want to answer 4 questions relating to this card that I think are on everyone's mind. Question number 1, is it better than Altergeist Hexia? Question number 2, can Altergeist reliably summon a Link 4 monster? Question number 3, is this the boost that Altergeist needed to be like a truly tier 1 deck again? And question 4, will this card be played? And I feel like all 4 of these questions are very important, but especially that last one. So in today's video, I'm going to answer every single one of those 4 questions that I feel are very important, and I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability as one of the more competitive Altergeist players. So first, is this card better than Hexia? Well, let's take a look at what it does to answer that question. This takes 2+ Altergeist monsters. It has 2800 attack. Its arrows are left and right, and then bottom left and right, so pretty decent arrows, all things considered. First, during the battle phase, as a quick effect, you contribute 1 other monster. This card gains attack equal to the attack the attributed monster had on the field. When this card, as a second effect here, destroys a monster by battle, you can destroy 1 monster your opponent controls with a non-targeting destruction here, and if you do, this card can make a second attack in a row. And then lastly, thirdly here, if this card would be destroyed, you can banish 1 monster from your graveyard instead, and all those effects are hard once per turns. There's a couple cool things to note here. First off, if you tribute a Hexia that is being boosted by its own effect, it'll gain all the attack that it had. That means this thing can be like 5,000 or 6,000 attack, which is really big. You can definitely attack over almost any monster in the game, but also you can do a bunch of damage with that attack. And then, like I said, the second effect, the destruction effect, doesn't actually target. That is huge. I mean, if you think of a card like Dingirsi, one of the big advantages of that ability to send a card is that your opponent doesn't know which card you're sending. That same thing sort of applies here. So even though this card isn't sending, it's destroying, which is a little bit unfortunate, it still doesn't target. So if your opponent has a bunch of monsters on the field and you use this effect, they have to choose whether or not to negate it or not, even without knowing which card you're actually going to destroy. But is this card better than Hexia? I mean, the answer is obviously no. I mean, how do you ever power creep Hexia in an Altergeist deck list? It does everything, right? I mean, it searches, it negates, it has a lot of attack points. Hexia truly is like the perfect Link monster for Altergeist, so naturally this card isn't going to be better. However, I want to say here, I don't think this card has to be better than Hexia to actually be a good card, and that's where I feel like a lot of people are really missing the mark on analyzing this thing, because yes, this card is not better than Hexia, but the Altergeist deck has so many extra deck spots, it doesn't really need to be better than Hexia, it just has to be a decent card, and this really is. And that brings us to question number 2. Can Altergeist reliably summon a Link 4 monster? And to my sort of surprise here, I mostly saw comments from people that said Altergeist can't really summon this big of Link monster, it's just not going to happen, and that really surprised me because it couldn't be further from the truth. So on the screen right now, I'm going to show you a pretty basic combo with Altergeist that you could probably already be doing right now if you didn't know it existed. Altergeist can do a lot of different variations of a very similar combo depending on which cards they have access to as well as which cards the opponent has. This one is pretty standard though, so if you open Marionetter and Spoofing, you usually can perform this combo on your second turn, so not the first turn, but at least the second or third turn at the latest. All you have to do is start your turn with a Multi-Faker and a Mylusic and a Protocol face up on the field. Like I said, a Spoofing plus a Marionetter can very easily get to this setup. I think some people that don't play Altergeist, or maybe don't play Altergeist quite the way I do, might think it's a little bit more difficult to get to than it actually is, but this is about about like the third or maybe the second most common combo in the Altergeist deck right now. So I'll play the normal combo in the background as I'm talking here, and what you want to know here is that literally the only thing that changes out of this entire combo if you want to summon this Link 4 monster is that instead of summoning a second Hexia at the very end of the combo, you summon this Link 4 instead. Does that affect your ending board? Well, sure, you have one less copy of Hexia, but you still have all those other interruptions. You have the bounce, you have the monster negate, you have the Hexia negate, you have the Conquery. But the big advantage here that I feel a lot of people are missing is that in the case of that combo that I just showed you guys, the only forms of removal you have during the combo at least are the Molseek 500 direct attack, which is pretty good. It can take out any one card and send to the graveyard. And then other than that though, you only have a 2000 attack Hexia, which is good in a lot of cases, but if your opponent has a really big board full of a lot of strong monster cards, that Hexia probably can't attack over anything, and that could be a real problem. The huge advantage of this Link 4 monster is that you can use it to take out 3 monsters on top of that Molseek send. It can attack twice, and the first time it attacks, it gets to blow up a monster on the field, so if your opponent ended with 4 big monsters, now you can take out all of them, because the Molseek takes out 1, and the Link 4 monster takes out 3 of them. Yes, 3 of them, because it attacks once, and then it blows up a monster, and then attacks a second time. So now with just 2 cards, you can blow up all of your opponent's cards and end on that ridiculous board. In other words, the answer to whether or not Altergeist can reliably summon a Link 4 monster is a resounding yes, and I'm really surprised people don't realize that. I think the main reason is that in an Altergeist extra deck, you often don't see cards like Borolo Dragon and Boral Sword Dragon or Avermax or Appaloosa. The reason being is that you don't play those cards because during the turn that you activate the Multi-Faker special summon effect, you are not allowed to summon non-Altergeist. A lot of players and even some newer Altergeist players tend to miss that restriction, so keep that in mind when discussing this card. Altergeists haven't been making Link 4 monsters very often right now in the current builds because there wasn't an Altergeist Link 4 monster to make. Question number 3, is this the boost that Altergeists really need right now? And the answer for the most part is no. This card isn't going to make too much of a difference. Sure, it might come up a couple times throughout a tournament, but in terms of the issues with Altergeist, which is about their first turn and their consistency, this card doesn't really do anything to help out those. That being said, I believe that this card is alongside a couple other cards in the anime that actually are pretty decent. So hopefully, because this card was just announced, it means those other cards will come to the TCG. That would be really exciting. While this might not be the best of the bunch, it certainly is a useful addition to the regular Altergeist extra deck. I think most people know this already, but if you really wanted to push Altergeist to be a top tier contender yet again, you would give them a Link 1 monster. That would be a huge difference. Something that you could actually use a Marionetta or a Silk for, because right now, yeah, Molseek is pretty good turn 1, and Marionetta is pretty good turn 1 for setting a trap card, but a really solid Link 1 monster would be insanely beneficial. Do I think that'll happen? Probably not, because the current series of anime for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is ending, and I believe that was where all these Altergeist cards were coming from, but maybe in the future they will get some legacy support, maybe down the road a couple of years from now, and that would be super awesome. And that brings us to my final question, which is, will this card actually be played in Altergeist when it eventually comes out in both the OCG format and the TCG format? And I think the answer has been made pretty clear by now if you've been listening, and of course this card will be played. I actually found it really funny reading through all the comments from people that don't play Altergeist decks saying things like, oh, I don't think the deck actually has space in its extra deck for a card like this, not even a single copy. And to me that was just so funny because like none of the cards in the Altergeist extra deck matter except for Hexia and Linkuriboh. Sure, if you play Crackdown you have to dedicate a spot to Dingirsu and Hayate, and I guess if you play Super Poly you have to dedicate a couple spots to those, but unless you're playing both Super Poly and Crackdown, you should have room for at least one copy of this new monster. It seems like an auto-include to me. If you guys have been watching my recent Altergeist tournament report videos and deck profile videos, you might notice that in the last couple spots of the extra deck, there's like 3 or 4 cards that come up in every single profile where I say I never summon these. They're usually Nightmare Cerberus, Nightmare Phoenix, sometimes Mekk-Knight Avermax, and even at the last regional that I went to, I cut the 4th card for an Altergeist Kidolga, a card that's much worse than this Link 4. And to be completely honest here, I have probably summoned the Avermax, the Phoenix, or the Cerberus maybe once every 2 tournaments for each of those cards. The Avermax I basically have never summoned without Crackdown. It's been a while since I played that card. The Phoenix sometimes comes up, but not too often. The Cerberus is probably the most likely to come up because of outing the Nibiru token, but in general, you're usually locking yourself into only Altergeist monsters during every single turn, because when your deck is actually operating the way you want it to be, you're summoning Multifaker every single one of your opponent's turns, but your turns as well, to sort of get those big combos to actually happen. And when you're doing that, you can't summon any of those extra deck monsters, which sounds kind of weird saying out loud, but just those sort of extra cards that you don't usually summon very often because they're not Altergeist and they're not Link Kribo. So yeah, by comparison, playing a Link 4 Altergeist monster, which while it might not come up every single game, will actually probably come up more often than those other cards I was already playing, seems like an obvious inclusion to me as an Altergeist player. While this isn't true for every single card out there, when we're talking about extra deck cards for an Altergeist deck list, the card doesn't have to be amazing to actually find the space because there's so much extra space already. The very nature of this card, by being an Altergeist monster, makes it much more useful than almost any other card you can put in your extra deck, and for that reason, I can see myself running at least one, maybe even two copies of this card when it comes to the TCG. Anyway though, I hope I answered whatever questions you guys had about how I feel about this new Link 4 monster. I think it's a lot better than people are giving it credit for, and I think it's partly because a lot of people have this in their head where they're like, oh, Altergeists are a control deck, they can't summon big Link monsters, and while I see where they're coming from because of just past experiences, when I'm playing Altergeist, I'm trying to do these big combos every single turn to lock my opponent out of the game, to put a bunch of damage out, and while I don't always see every single Altergeist player doing those, which is maybe where this stigma comes from, other than exactly turn 1 or when you brick and you have to draw into your Altergeist monsters, these combos should happen by turn 2 or turn 3 almost every single game you play if you're trying to actually play the deck correctly. That being said, I'll see you guys later. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.